Welcome back to the second part of this presentation about the knowledge economy, knowledge society. In the previous part, we remained on the high level. Now we are going down to the level of the organization and that of the individual. So what is the role of the knowledge in organizations? When Peter Drucker first talked about the idea of the knowledge economy, he said that the essential thing is to contrast the manual worker with the knowledge worker. At that time, it was more about people using their hands in the pre-information era. So most of the employees were doing some manual work in a very literal sense of the word. And then, as the time progressed, more and more of this very manual work was taken over by machines. And people were doing more of those things that machines cannot do, basically something that you need to think about. Now, if you think, for example, about a mechanic, it is a manual work in the sense that the mechanic is using his hands. But it is not a manual work in the sense that you need very, very significant knowledge in order to be able to fix anything. That's why there are those jokes that you need to pay £101 for a mechanic who fixes your television by hitting it. He says it is £1 for hitting your TV and £100 that I knew how and where to hit your TV. So that is about the importance of knowledge in more and more areas of our work. Now, what Drucker says is that in the 20th century, the management achieved something very, very significant. We achieved the 50-fold increase of the productivity of the manual work. But now we need a paradigm shift. We have now so many knowledge workers that now we would need to achieve a similar increase of the productivity of the knowledge workers. Now, what is the problem here? And that's why Drucker ended up introducing the idea of the knowledge society and the knowledge economy. The problem is that if you take the same methods that you had about the manual work and apply it to the knowledge work, it will not work. Why? How you deal with the manual worker? Basically, the idea of the manual work is that anyone can do it. So we set up everything around you, we standardized every movement, and we make it sure that you cannot do it wrong. And what happens? The person who is actually doing that job is easily replaceable. But it cannot be done if we are talking about the knowledge work. How can you standardize the ways of how the director is running the company? Can you make some standards that will make sure that the director will not make any mistakes? If that was true, then we would not have any bankruptcies ever. But on the other hand, it would also mean that all the companies would be exactly the same. So it is just not happening. But you also must notice that it is a very different division of the work than the white collar, blue collar. Because normally in the white collar jobs, we think about people who are sitting in offices and doing their jobs in wearing white collars, so wearing suits and similar, while the manual worker is working in a factory or in a workshop or similar places. But I just already said that the mechanic is a knowledge worker, although it is a blue-collar worker. Do we have opposite examples? I can actually give you some. If the person is easily replaceable because anyone can do that, that qualifies as a manual worker. So if you can do nothing else but doing the magic with the Excel tables, more or less anyone who graduated from any university can do the same. That will not make you a knowledge worker. So that's why I started to talk about the white-collar manual workers. These are people who are easily replaceable. They don't know anything special that only them or only few people know. They only know things that anyone knows. It does not mean that you should not learn using Excel, because without that you cannot qualify for any kind of good job. So it is an entry condition, but it will not make you really valuable for the company, because anyone can do that. But There are other aspects to it. The manual worker, as they were so easily replaceable, we did not care about them. We did not want the person, we just wanted their hands. And that led to these enormously ugly terms like human resources. I am not a human resource. I reject being a human resource. I am a person. Now, if you are a knowledge worker, your knowledge is valuable to the company, then it is much more likely that they are accepting your personality as part of the deal. It is part of the package. Why? Because the knowledge worker is not that easily replaceable. And it is not only knowledge that we are talking about. As I said before, I don't know something, but I know a person who knows or who might know. In that case, this is something that is happening in my network. It is a kind of level of meta-knowledge. So I know about some other knowledge, and this is, as you see on the picture below, it is that guy in the middle who knows lots of people in all sorts of different directions. Now, the prototype of these very well-connected people who don't have subject-specific knowledge so much by themselves, but they know about other knowledgeable people, they are called knowledge brokers, but we don't really go into details about that today. So if we think about a kind of long-term competitive advantage, is it possible? If we are in this knowledge economy, knowledge era, it has to do something with knowledge. Okay? That is what is difficult to copy or imitate. Everything else is very easy to replicate. It is not the knowledge itself anymore. It is more about learning. It is how good you are at learning new things and how good you are at applying knowledge that you already have. And these organizations that are good at these things are called the learning organizations. And I have put there Peter Senge's definition of the learning organization. So it is not about being able to create what you want to create. It is when you are not able to create what you want to create, that then you can increase your capacity, improve your capacity within the organization, enabling you to become able to create what you want to create. It is a specific environment. It is an environment where all learning is useful, where the complex thinking patterns are rewarded just because they are complex, just because it is knowledge, just because it is learning, not only when it is directly useful for the organization. And obviously, it is also a very social process, so people learn together, and how they learn together, then they are learning how to learn together even better, and so on. Now, if we want to describe how these companies respond to the changes in their environment, then we can describe that with the various levels of learning. So if you look at the picture, we can think about three boxes. So we have some what we call governing variables. That's basically how we describe the conditions under which we work and what we are and our identity and so on. Then we are doing certain things, so there are some processes, and these actions that we do have some consequences. Now, the learning organization is responding to these consequences, and the simplest thing is what we call the single loop learning. I see the consequences. These are not the desirable consequences, so I change the action. That's the single loop learning. However, it might not be sufficient. Not necessarily all the time. This is just fixing things very quickly. There is something that we call the double loop learning based on Argyris and Schoen. And that means that we go back to what we see as governing variables, what we see as conditions of these actions. Based on what we decided to take these actions, we can rethink those. Now, if we rethink these governing variables, that may lead to radically different actions than in the previous case. If we are within the single loop learning, that is much faster, but it is not really leading to radically different actions. The rethinking the governing variables may. But is this the highest level of complexity that there is? Not necessarily. we may have even bigger changes than that. It is about the context. What we consider as our context as an organization. Can we change that? And we see that it is possible. Even 10 years ago, if someone thought about IBM, they would think about a great computer manufacturer. Today, they are one of the big consulting companies. So they changed the complete context. They changed their identity. They changed what they are about. And they are still successful. That they did not change. Now, the knowledge in itself is not sufficient. There is something beyond the knowledge. If I just know a lot, is it useful? Just think about the Big Bang Theory or similar kind of movies or drama series. Why are they so funny? Because you have some very, very knowledgeable people who are just not fit to the world. Now, what they are missing? The first thing that can be easily identified is that their knowledge frequently is not rooted in experience. Basically, we call it a textbook knowledge. It is not sufficient. You need experience together with the knowledge that you acquire, and these two will become somehow a more actionable version of the knowledge. Of course, experience in itself is also not sufficient. What matters is what you make out of this experience that you have. The next thing is that this kind of actionable knowledge does require a high level of knowledge. Just the high level of knowledge is not sufficient, as we can see in Big Bang Theory, for example. And there are also different types of knowledge. For example, I said previously that we are often looking for experience, ideas, and so on. Intuition is a perfectly valid type of knowledge. And if you are sticking to the textbook, that would not be acceptable. Now, it is not only this about the actionability of the knowledge. It is also very important that there is a kind of dynamic relationship between three components. It is the knowledge of the person with all its personality, style, identity, and so on, and the context in which it is valid. For example, if I can do lectures, I can do presentations, I can do these talks, does it mean that I can do it to any audience? Well, I tried. I can do university-type lectures, but sometimes I went to a very different audience, which was not receptive to this kind of lecturing. If you have a person who is a very successful CEO of a hospital, are you sure that this person would be also very successful in running a car manufacturing company? Not necessarily. The other part of it is how it suits my style. If I have a certain style how I do lectures, if someone copies that exactly, would it be the same kind of lecture as I am doing it? Not necessarily, because this is fitting my style. It might not fit that person's style. So all the three components somehow need to be in harmony. Now, if these three come into a dynamic relationship, a dynamic harmony, it is actionable through the previously mentioned components. That is what we call competence. And what we need is really competent people. And as we are aiming for graduates with impact, we are trying in MDP to develop the competence. And you will see by the time you get to the third year that as we cannot provide you with real-life experience inside the classroom, you will bring the experience you acquired elsewhere into the classroom. Thank you very much. You have another task to complete.